In 2017, an 18-year-old woman named Obdulia Sanchez was using Instagram like millions of other young people. She was driving around California, listening to music, singing along, and sharing the moment with people watching her livestream. There was nothing particularly unusual about it. It was simply a young woman enjoying herself and documenting part of her day. But by the end of that livestream, Obdulia's life would be changed forever. And what makes the story even more difficult is that the person sitting beside her was someone she knew better than almost anyone else. Her younger sister, Jacqueline. Jacqueline was only 14 years old, and according to her family, she had a lot to look forward to. She was approaching her 15th birthday and was preparing for her quinceañera, a special celebration that would have marked an important moment in her life. For the two sisters, this was supposed to be nothing more than another ordinary day. Neither of them could have known that the events that were about to unfold would become something they could never take back. On July 21st, 2017, Obdulia was driving near Los Banos, California with Jacqueline and another 14-year-old girl in the back of her car. At the time, Obdulia was live streaming herself on Instagram. She was singing along to music and dancing in her seat, apparently unaware that anything was about to happen. The road was relatively quiet and everything seemed normal. Then, out of nowhere, the car began drifting towards the edge of the road. Obdulia tried to correct it, but the vehicle suddenly moved across the road, and within seconds, the car crashed through a barbed wired fence and overturned in a nearby field. The impact was devastating, and it threw both teenage passengers outside the vehicle. And most concerning of all, the two teenagers in the back weren't wearing any seatbelts. Jacqueline was thrown through the back window and suffered fatal injuries. The other passenger survived, although was left with a serious injury to her leg. But there was something else that made the accident unlike any other. Obdulia's phone was still recording. The live stream had continued throughout the crash, meaning that the moments immediately after were captured on camera. Obdulia turned the phone towards her sister and began trying to wake her up. The reality of what had happened seemed to slowly sink in, and Obdulia began talking directly to the camera, pleading for Jacqueline to wake up and saying, "I killed my sister." She also said that she knew she was going to prison for life, while the surviving passenger could be seen trying to get the attention of passing cars on the road. The footage was eventually copied and spread across social media, turning what had been a private family tragedy into a video seen by people all over the world. And Obdulia was arrested and charged with gross vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated, along with several other charges relating to driving under the influence and injuring the surviving passenger. However, the video didn't show everything about Obdulia's life. Her defense attorney said she was devastated by Jacqueline's death and urged people not to judge her entire life based off a few minutes of footage. He also revealed that Obdulia had experienced a deeply troubling childhood, including time in foster care and alleged human trafficking. But regardless of what had happened before the crash, one thing could not be changed. Jacqueline was gone. In 2018, Obdulia was sentenced to 6 years and 4 months in prison for the crash. She would eventually be released on parole in 2019, leaving behind the event that had completely changed her life. For years, that seemed to be where the story ended. The livestream remained online in various forms. Obdulia had served her sentence, and Jacqueline's family was left to live with a loss that could never be repaired. However, there was another chapter to Obdulia's story. One that nobody watching the livestream in 2017 could possibly have predicted. 8 years after the crash, Obdulia was living in Stockton, California. Then, on December 2nd, 2025, police were called to reports of a shooting. When officers arrived, they found a man and a woman suffering from gunshot wounds. The woman was urgently rushed to hospital, but later died. She was 26-year-old Obdulia Sanchez. The woman, whose livestream had once captured the final moments of her young sister's life, had now become the victim of a violent crime herself. Investigators later arrested a woman named Monica Barajas, who was charged with murder and attempted murder in connection with the shooting. And that brought an incredibly strange and tragic story full circle. Obdulia had spent years being remembered almost entirely for one terrible night and one video that she could never erase. But behind that video was a young woman who had a complicated life, a family of her own, and a sister she could never get back. For some people, jumping from a bridge hundreds of feet above the ground is nothing more than an extreme sport. But in Tbilisi, Georgia, rope jumping had become something much more personal than that. Young couples would sometimes take part in jumps together, holding onto each other as they fell from the bridge. For some, it had even become a romantic gesture, with couples treating the jump almost like a promise of their love. And in July of 2012, one couple decided to do exactly that. 23-year-old Maryam Kandashvili and 25-year-old Goga Golitani were in a relationship, and Goga was already a big fan of rope jumping. He had taken part in many jumps beforehand and was known among other jumpers as being very comfortable with the sport. Maryam admired how fearless he was, especially when it came to jumping from great heights. The two had also spent a lot of time talking through Facebook, and eventually Goga suggested that they should try a jump together. For Maryam, the idea was frightening, but she trusted the man she loved. And she also had another reason to believe they'd be safe. The jump was being run by experienced climbers from a group called Extreme Team, which was led by well-known Georgian climber Bidzina Gwajabinci. So on July 15, 2012, Maryam and Goga arrived at a bridge near Tbilisi State University. The bridge stood at a whopping 42 meters above the ground, with roughly 33 meters of freefall for the people taking part. And most shocking of all, beneath them wasn't a deep pool of water. It was a dry channel filled with rocks. Regardless, the couple were prepared for the jump and secured with ropes and safety equipment. According to reports, the main rope and the backing systems were checked before they went over the bridge. Everything appeared to be ready. Maryam and Goga held onto each other. The couple stepped off the bridge together and disappeared into the open air. But then, something went terribly wrong. The rope system had somehow failed. Exactly what caused the failure would become one of the biggest questions surrounding the accident. Early reports claimed the rope itself had broken, but some people who witnessed the accident gave a very different explanation. They said the ropes hadn't broken at all, and that part of the old bridge where they had been attached had given way. Whatever the exact cause was, the result was devastating. Maryam had died at the scene, whereas Goga survived the fall and was rushed to hospital. However, his injuries were way too severe, and Goga had died later that night. Two young people had gone to the bridge expecting a few seconds of excitement. Instead, neither of them would return home, and the accident immediately raised serious questions about how safe the activity really was. The organisers had previously said they used several strong climbing ropes. They also claimed that the ropes were supervised by experienced climbers. But somehow, on this particular jump, something had failed. Additionally, like mentioned before, the jump was taking place above a rocky dry channel rather than water. If something went wrong with the ropes, there was almost nothing below to give the jumpers a chance of surviving the fall. So logically, authorities launched an investigation, and the people who organised the event were questioned. One of the lead organisers said he was willing to take responsibility for what had happened, and he was questioned by police while the investigation continued. However, no one was actually arrested. But despite all the questions surrounding the incident, Maryam and Goga's families did not simply blame the people who had organised the jump. They recognised that the couple had chosen to take part themselves. Goga loved rope jumping, and Maryam had trusted him enough to take part as well. For them, the jump wasn't supposed to be a death sentence. It was supposed to be something they experienced together, and perhaps that's what makes this tragedy so difficult to forget. Maryam didn't step onto that bridge expecting to die. She stepped onto it, believing she was sharing an incredible experience with the person she loved. The tragedy also led to a wider debate in Tbilisi on whether rope jumping should be allowed to continue. Should an activity this dangerous be banned? Or should people be allowed to accept the risks that come along with extreme sports, just as climbers accept the dangers of climbing mountains? There isn't exactly a straight answer to this, and I don't believe there ever will be either. But for the families of Maryam and Goga, none of these arguments could change what had happened. Two young people had stepped off that bridge together that day, believing the ropes would catch them, and regardless of what caused their deaths, the safety equipment wasn't safe enough to keep them alive. At just 23 years old, Helen Wendy Nyabuto had already made a huge sacrifice to build a better future for herself and her family. Originally from Kenya, Helen moved to Canada when she was only 20 years old, arriving on a 10-year study visa. By 2022, she was nearing the end of her education while also working as both a nurse and a personal support worker in the Toronto area. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until August of 2022, when a tragic accident suddenly brought her life to an end. Helen had taken a personal support worker position in the small Ontario town of Chatsworth. Because of the distance, she rented a room at the town's only motel so she could stay close to a new job. The motel itself was fairly ordinary, but Helen was particularly interested in its outdoor swimming pool. On August 8th, she finally found some free time to enjoy it. Helen went outside for a swim and began live streaming the experience on Facebook. At first, everything seemed completely normal. She was alone in the pool, enjoying what seemed to be a quiet and relaxing afternoon. But around 10 minutes after entering the water, Helen decided to make her way towards a deeper section of the pool. Only moments after reaching it, something went terribly wrong. Helen suddenly lost control in the water and began struggling to stay afloat. With very little air left, she desperately called out for help. Unfortunately, no one was nearby to hear her. For almost a minute, Helen fought against the water before eventually drowning just outside the view of her phone's camera. The phone, however, continued broadcasting the live stream to Facebook. Her final words being, "Let me enjoy some water," would soon become an incredibly tragic reminder of what had happened that afternoon. What makes the story even more heartbreaking is that Helen remained undiscovered for nearly 3 hours. Eventually, 2 other guests arrived at the pool and noticed something was wrong. At first, they reportedly struggled to understand what they were actually seeing, but they soon realized Helen had drowned and immediately contacted motel management.
Why is there just a dead person in the line?
I know, that scared the shit out of me when I got in. I think it's a poodle or something.
What the hell is that?
Does that freak you out or what? Like, is it somebody? Walk over there. Just walk over there and have a look.
Dead? Because I'm not even trolling, that looks way too real. I think...
Isn't there a bunch of bows and arrows sticking out of it too?
No. Do you have their number? Like, are they there?
So they're in the house, they're in the office.
Can I give them a call?
Just go walk up to the office, knock on the door and say, just wondering about that pool.
I'm gonna give them a
Okay, go just tap on the door at the office. And just say, we're about to get in the pool. It looks like there's a dead person in there.
By the time someone came to check on her, it was already far too late. The livestream later helped establish that Helen's death was nothing more than a tragic accident, rather than the result of anything suspicious. But knowing this did little to ease the pain for her family. Her father later spoke out about watching the footage, saying, "I watched the video, I cried, it's terrible." Helen's death was especially devastating because she was the sole breadwinner of the family. Her relatives were later left unable to afford the cost of bringing her body back home to Kenya. When the story eventually gained some traction, however, people online came together to help. A fundraiser raised more than 66,000 Canadian dollars, providing more than enough money to cover Helen's funeral expenses and offering financial support to her family. It was an incredibly tragic end to the life of a young woman who had travelled thousands of miles in hopes of creating a better future.